Hi, and welcome to this Design Room 1 video on automatic publishing of designs. In this video we will look at how to set up your system in order to allow the automatic publishing. This is a big picture of what we are going to set up. This is also described in a document on our DevOps site. However, the setup in this case is slightly different and it can be done in many different ways, so it's just an example. In the left upper corner we have the client, Rational Software Architect, with the eGit plugin installed. We save the model in a local Git repository. Then in the upper right corner we have a Git hosting server. In this video we will use GitLab, where we will keep a remote version of the repository. Once a change is done and pushed to the remote Git repository, it will notify our build server, and we will use Jenkins, an open source build server, that will trigger a task onto an installation of RSAD with the Design Room 1 integration plugin installed on it, and that will in turn then export the model onto our Design Room 1 server on a fourth machine. Let us start with the client, Rational Software Architect Designer, with an eGit plugin. That has to be installed using Installation Manager, either directly when you install it, or you can later modify your installation and add this plugin. You can find it in the installation package under Extension for SOA and Web Applications, Enterprise Developer Tools, and there you have Eclipse Git Team Provider. Next, let's have a look at the remote repository. We will use GitLab, and I have downloaded that from about.gitlab.com. After you have installed GitLab, create a new project and give it a good name, in this case setup demo. We need to create a file in order to get a branch, and I will just create a README file. This means that we now have a GitLab repository. I have one setting to do here. In the settings repository, I will unprotect the master branch. This is because in the demo I will use the master branch. Now we have to connect the local Git repository with the remote Git repository. In Rational Software Architect, select the Git perspective and click Clone a Git repository. In the dialog that appears, type in the host and the repository path to the repository that you just created. Observe the .git at the end. In this demo, I will use the HTTP protocol. That means that I have to give a username and password also. Select the branch to use, in this case master, then next and finish. Now we have the remote repository and a local working directory with the same file in the Git repositories tab. So let us commit the local model, switch to the modeling perspective, right click the project and select Teams Share Project. Select Git and next. In the repository, select the one that we just created and click Finish. In the Project Explorer, right click the project, Teams, and Commit. Type in a commit message and select the files to commit. Press Commit and Push in order to both commit it to the local repository and push it to the remote repository. In the Git perspective, we can now see that the files exist in the Git working directory. If we switch to GitLab, we can see that the files exist also there. In Rational Software Architect, Git Repositories tab, in the origin, we have to adjust the ref mappings for fetch. Add a new ref mapping. Start by typing M for master. And then delete the ref mapping that was added by default. Now we have to set up the build server, and I will start by installing the Design Room 1 plugin to Rational Software Architect Designer. Go to the Help menu and select Install New Software. In the Work With, type in the web address to the Design Room 1 server and its P2 installation path for the version of Rational Software Architect Designer that you're using. Then select the Design Room Exporter feature, click Next and finish the install. The build server also needs Git, and you can download that from this site and install it. For the actual build server, I have chosen to use Jenkins. It's an open source software, and you can download that from jenkins.io. When you're installing Jenkins, make sure that you install it on a path that doesn't contain any spaces, because there's a plugin that can't take spaces. In the setup, make sure that you select the plugins to install and search for the GitLab plugin. Once Jenkins is installed, we have to create a new job. Give the job a proper name, in this case how to export demo. Make sure it's a freestyle project and click OK. We have to set up the build job. We make sure that it uses Git, and we type in the repository URL. And this is the URL to our remote Git repository. Remember the .git. We have to give the credentials since we are using HTTP. Further down, we make sure that we build when there's a change push to GitLab. And we also check the GitHub hook trigger. Now we have to specify what this build server is actually going to do. So we create a Windows batch command that will start Rational Software Architect Designer, calling an add script. As part of this job, Jenkins will download the files from our remote repository. We can see here that we have some file called export.xml. That's a file needed by the Ant Runner script. Let's save the job. Then let's go into GitLab. In the current repository, select Settings and Integrations in order to create a webhook. We do this by giving the URL to Jenkins. We let it trigger on push events and merge request events. Disable SSL and add this hook. Now, when something is pushed to GitLab, it will call the Jenkins server that will start its job of publishing. We saw that we needed a special file, so let's create that one in GitLab. It was called export.xml, and the content is some standard content needed by the Ant script. If we switch to Jenkins, we can see that it has actually started a build. But the build failed because it cannot find config.xml. That's not strange, so let's create that one. Config.xml. The content of this file is what you get in the Design Room 1 exporter plugin. It specifies what to export and how to save it. I've made one small change, and that is on line 5, where I use resource pattern. Again, switching to Jenkins, we see that another build has been started. And if we scroll down here, we can see that it is a successful build and it has published all our stuff. If we open the model in Design Room 1, and then compare it with Rational Software Architect Designer, we can see that they are the same. So let's introduce a change and commit and push those changes into Git. and then open Design Room 1 again, and we can see that our changes has been pushed to Design Room 1. That was all for this demo. If you want some more information, please visit the DevOps community.